Floor plans, flexibility, demographics, tiny houses, all interesting new trends related to real estate. So as demographics in our country change, we're going to see demand for different products in the housing sector. One interesting thing that occurred yesterday, being May 10th, is the City of Toronto, their City Council actually now passed that they're no longer going to have single-family residential zoning. So you'll no longer be able to just have single-family homes. You'll be able to have single-family homes, duplex, triplex, fourplex. They all essentially mean the same thing. So essentially they are looking to open up complete craziness of what people can do with their homes, which, hey, arguably, I don't know, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but the reality is that they are addressing the housing crisis that they have in Toronto. Toronto obviously has, I think, a bigger housing crisis than we have in London, but anyways, it's a great, interesting segue into the topic today. So what are we kind of starting to see some chatter around when we do talk about things like floor plans, flexibility in the home, demographics, things like that? Accessory units that are like mortgage helper units. So multi-generational living under one roof is starting to increase as one of the conversations. You're seeing that with our due to our aging demographic in Canada. So obviously the baby boomers are the largest segment of the population, and they are getting much older. They're retiring in greater numbers. But at that same time that they're retiring, you're also seeing housing and the cost of operating a house is increasing drastically. So you're starting to see a bit of a conversation of kind of going to more the old world, as I call it, way of living, where you might get older parents moving in with their adult children. So let's say somebody like myself who's in their 40s, who has young kids. Maybe my parents or one of my parents would move in with me. They would help me with my kids, but then they also help with the operational and day-to-day functioning of the household. So that's one big trend that we have started to see recently. We're also starting to see along that trend is multiple primary bedroom suites. So instead of just having your master bedroom or your primary bedroom with an ensuite and a walk-in closet, we're starting to see people more interested in having two suites in the home. Not necessarily on the main floor or the second floor. Could be one on the second floor, could be one in the basement, one on the main floor, one on the second floor. But there's there's this new interest of multiple suites in the home. So I'm not looking at massive homes to do this. Obviously, you do, generally speaking, need a little bit of a larger home, but it is something when you get into the multi-generational living. Obviously, you know, grandparents don't want to share necessarily a bathroom with their grandchildren or their adult children. So that's one thing that we're seeing for floor plans changing. The other one that segues into that is what you would call maybe an ADU, or an accessory dwelling unit. So these are essentially accommodations within a single family home that aren't completely separated from the rest of the house. So in the sense of being duplexed, where there's no way of traveling between those two units, an ADU would potentially have that ability. And so that would have obviously a bedroom, a full bathroom, and a little kitchenette set up for the individual. In a lot of cases, you see friends and family will rent those, or in some cases, complete strangers end up renting them. It just really depends on the situation. But the idea is that the additional cost of getting that ADU set up in that home is not so expensive that it doesn't end up being a mortgage helper. The idea is if you can set something like that up and it's marginally, let's say it costs you 80 grand, but you can rent it for, let's say, $1,400. I mean, obviously it's worth doing because, yes, that extra goes on to your mortgage, but in the end you end up with, if it's 80,000 and it's 14, you probably end up with about $800 of extra money to go to pay for utilities, operational costs of the home, and the mortgage payment. So that's another trend that we're seeing. Another trend related to floor plans, maybe not necessarily floor plans, but I guess is something called a tiny house or a garden suite. Now, we have seen these on the west coast of Canada, so Victoria, Vancouver area, and as well West Coast throughout the United States, where you've maybe heard them as alley homes. People have converted garages into these types of units. They are just essentially small one-bedroom units, or even like just a one open loft area space that you're renting out. What's very interesting about it is there being in Canada, there's some lending issues, and where those lending issues come in is, one, most lenders don't recognize tiny houses or garden suites as adding any value, especially if they're under 850 square feet. So if it's let's say a 700 square foot tiny house attached to your backyard or in your backyard, a lender will just see that as a glorified garden shed. And even though it costs you probably $120,000, $130,000 to put in, at the end of the day, they're not putting value on it. So right now what we're seeing is more of the affluent or wealthier people who are coming out of the big cities. And generally speaking, where you're seeing these ideas coming up is in larger lots. So if somebody, let's say, lives on the edge of town and you've got a 1 acre lot, it's something more that they're considering right now for their retired parents, who maybe are only around for 6-7 months of the year, and then they're snowbirds and they take off to Florida or wherever for the remainder of the year. But the biggest hurdle with that we're going to see in Canada is related to lending on it. Now, there's been some chatter amongst the big banks that they're starting to warm up to these ideas. However, for this to become commonplace, you're going to need some changes to the Banking Act, and you're also going to need a whole bunch of board of directors at all these major institutions to sit down and decide that, yes, they're going to start lending to this. So it'll be interesting to see, but that's the other big trend that you're starting to see more and more, kind of like everywhere in North America. And why I'm bringing up all of these is more of the concept of working with your new build clients to future-proof their home. Let's be honest, owning a home is not going to get cheaper. I highly doubt we're going to see interest rates go down to the levels they were once at 2 years ago. I highly doubt energy and operational costs of a home are going to drop to where they were, again, 2, 3, 4 years ago. I just think it's not going to happen. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But let's just go with that. The cost of owning a home in Canada or North America is going to remain relatively high for the foreseeable future. It maybe does make sense on all of your floor plans to prepare for some of these ideas. So maybe somebody doesn't necessarily want to install an ADU in their basement straight away. Having it set up for that to occur 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years after the home is built, I think is a very good idea. I think also maybe setting it up so that you can have easy access to add a secondary dwelling unit or a tiny home or a garden suite outside is also a smart thing to do. So that would be somehow, wherever your utility room is, an electrical panel is all set up, that there is an easy way of getting those services to that tiny dwelling. Now, yes, obviously, sewage is hard to move and you would need some form of a holding tank for a tiny dwelling, but being able to get the proper electrical services and hot and cold water, maybe primarily actually cold water, you'd probably heat the water inside that tiny dwelling. But just thinking about these things to future-proof and bringing that up with people that it is something you offer, I think is an extremely valuable kind of like add-on that you could say that you should start talking to your clients about. We are seeing people talking about it. Like I said, housing is getting more and more expensive. Land values don't seem to be really going down, and the cost to build a home doesn't really seem to be going down. So these little bits, are just another way you can bring value to your clients. So hopefully you found value in this video. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, shoot me an email, give me a call. If you want to talk about any other topics, more than happy to do so.